So, Leo, what's your story?
My story is Pinocchio.
Something? I'm gonna make it up. Well, do you know characters?
Yeah, I said you make it.
I'm gonna make up the whole thing. Okay. So the characters are the High C Man, and we'll start with him. And the setting is gonna be something, some kids in a park. So there were some kids in a park, and they were very thirsty. And one of them said, "Hey, we can drink some water out of the fountain over there." And so they all went over to the drinking fountain. And it was all yucky. It was all broken and rusted and stuff. Ew, they said. And one little boy said, "I don't care. I'm so thirsty. I'm just going to drink the yucky water." The other ones are like, "No, no, don't do it." And the little girl said, "Hey, maybe we can call for High C." And the boy said, "That doesn't work. That's just in the commercials." Now, in the commercials, a long time ago when I was a little boy, they had these commercials where kids could go, "Hey, High C," and High C would come crashing through a wall. And High C was a huge pitcher full of this fruity drink. And he had arms and legs and a face on the pitcher. He'd come smashing through the wall, and he'd go, "Hey, everybody," and then he'd pour some High C. I guess he was pouring it out of the top of his brains. I'm not really sure how it happened, but everybody all of a sudden had a glass of High C and they drank it. So these kids had seen that same commercial that I had seen. And the boy said, "That doesn't work. That's only on TV." She said, "Well, maybe it'll work because we're so thirsty." And another little boy said, "I'm going to call High C." And the bigger boy said, "No, don't you dare." And the big girl said, "High C, High C." And they all started arguing, and some of them were yelling, "High C, High C," and some of them were not. And all of a sudden they heard, and they screamed and jumped and turned around, and the trees, there was a forest nearby, and the trees were rattling, and the birds were flying out of the trees, and all of a sudden the foremost trees, the trees that they could see, split apart, and it was a huge, huge picture of High C, and he was like, "Whoa!" And the boy said, "I told you not to call High C." And the girl said, "I didn't know it was real." And they started running, and everybody said, "No, we're really going to be thirsty." And High C was running after them, and he was jostling and sloshing his High C around, and it was coming out the top of his head because he was a pitcher, he had an open head. And he was like, "Brah, brah, brah, brah." And the kids were running and running, and one of them tripped and fell and looked back, and High C was getting closer and closer, and the other ones came back and got her and said, "Come on, get up." And they helped her up, like, because apparently when people trip they can't get up by themselves. And so they all started running, and they found a cement tube, and they ran inside the tube and hid there and screamed and whimpered. And the little girl that had fallen, she said, "I saw kids in the High C." And the older boy said, "Don't be ridiculous. No kid could get in that High C." And the older girl said, "Maybe the High C eats the kids and puts them in the High C that's inside the High C." Because High C is the name of the guy, and High C is also the stuff that's inside the guy. And they looked out, and the giant High C was right there. And they screamed. And the older boy said, "I did see. There's kids floating around in the High C." And they were like, "Help us, help us." And the little girl said, "We've got to help those little kids are swimming in the High C and that High C monster guy." And the little boy said, "I'm scared, I want to go home." And the older boy said, "I'm so scared I'm going to pee my pants." And he peed them right there. And all the other kids were like, "Oh, get away from the pee. It's filling up the cement tube we're hiding in." But it was too late. They were all sitting in some pee. And one of them peeked out. He said, guys, I think the high sea's gone. And then he crawled out. And the high sea grabbed him, rah, and lifted him up into the air, and he was kicking and screaming, ah, ah, ah. And the other kids watched as the high sea put him inside the top of his head. The kid was swimming around in there, help, help. And there was a bunch of other kids in there, help, help, the high sea has us. And it was just the older boy, the older girl, and the little girl that were left. The older boy said, we need to get out of here and save ourselves. But the older girl said, no, we have to rescue our friend, the little boy, plus all the people that are in the high sea. The older boy said, have you seen that high sea? He's very clever, and he hides, and then he gets us. And the little girl said, well, then we can't even escape. And the older boy and the older girl looked and said, you're right. What are we going to do? The older boy said, we're going to have to dig a hole to China. And so they started trying to dig, but they were in a cement tube and they couldn't dig. And then the little girl said, I know, we could roll these tubes. And the little girl said, oh, you're right.
What does roll these tubes mean?
Well, you'll find out in just a second.
Okay.
And so the older boy, the older girl, and the little girl got in one tube, one cement tube, and they went, heave, ho, heave, ho, and they pushed against one side, then the other, and the tube started rocking. Ho, heave, heave, ho, heave, ho, and they rocked it out, and it started rolling. And they were inside the tube rolling around. Wow, 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 wow. And the older boy said, don't let go, don't fall out of the tube while it's rolling. And it started rolling down a grassy hill, because the playground had a grassy hill. And then they heard, and they knew they had started escaping the high sea, but they didn't know where they were going to land. And they kept rolling and rolling and rolling. And then they heard a car, and they kept on rolling, and they didn't know where they were. And they hit something, it sounded like a garbage can, and then the cat, and then they kept on going down a street or something, and they heard, and then they heard the police, and they kept on rolling until they hit the bottom of a hill, and they got out, and it was the high sea, and all the police were surrounding him. And they were like, give up, high sea. We're going to throw you in jail. And he was like, roar. And the girl came running up and she said, the high sea is not a real high sea. It's like a big dinosaur high sea. He can't even understand English. And the police said, we're going to have to open fire. And the older boy just caught up and said, no, you can't open fire. There's kids in that high sea. And they looked. And then the police officer got on his radio and said, we can't open fire. There's kids in that high sea. And so the little girl came running up too. And the older boy said, little girl, you're so smart. You told us how to roll up that tube. What should we do to kill the high sea? She said, you should get a giant straw and drink all the high sea out of him. And the police officer said, that's a crazy idea, but it just might work. It might be crazy enough to work. And so they got a fire engine. And the high sea was trying to stomp on people and beat them up, but the people were being pushed away by the police officers, so the high sea couldn't get them. And they said, come on, get those hoses ready. And the firemen got the hoses ready, and they said, now what? And the little girl said, you have to reverse engine on the fire engine. And so they reversed the pumps on the fire engine, and they threw the hose in the high sea, and it went, and the high sea was like, and sucked all the high sea out of them, and there was just a bunch of kids in the bottom of the high sea, and then the high sea fell over. And he was made out of glass, and he went, and he broke into a bajillion pieces. And they took all the kids, and they put them in the ambulance and took them to the hospital and made sure they were okay. And
Really? Wait.
yeah, that really happened. And then that was the end. And they just went back to the park and drank water out of the yucky faucet, or the yucky fountain. The end.
Daddy,
Yeah?
did they get hurt by the shards?
That's a good point. They might have got a little bit hurt. Yeah, never play around with glass. Okay, now what's the name of this story, guys?
Hi-C and the 4 kids.
Hi-C and the 4 kids.